Imagine if on your next vacation, when you roll up to the pool, your favorite beverage is right there, tableside to where you want to sit. Or if when you walk into the lobby or the venue that you are visiting, the host greets you by name. This is the power of amazing hospitality. And we're about to talk about the early beginnings of how hospitality in the restaurant world has impacted how I work with my clients and how I invite my clients to impact their worlds. My name is Ernesto. I run a company called MDM, or $1 Million Machine. I help business owners maximize relationships. We do that by designing CRM solutions to help grow sales, grow revenue, referrals, and reviews.
How did you get started in the hospitality industry?
So in my last video, I spoke about my early beginnings where we'd have these parties at my home, and I one day met a restaurant owner. He owns 6 restaurants, and I said, I want to do that. And I eventually would throw a party and change my life. After that evening, it was the summer that I was going to college, and when I went to college, I said, I want to study systems engineering. But the idea of the restaurant still remained in me. So I wanted to really see how I can bring these two worlds together. And so I worked at a restaurant my senior year of college. At the same time, I also launched my first food business. So from those two opportunities, I ultimately decided which path I was going to take. I would continue on with my food business. And even after graduating college, I would still think about how do I get into restaurants with the specific skill set that I had, one of systems engineering and technology, which eventually led me to creating an opportunity at a restaurant group, helping them with a lot of their back-end processes. But through that, I would discover just the impact of having 5-star service, how it would really make your business become so memorable.
And so this restaurant that you started working for, where was it and how did you get this opportunity to work with them?
I was living in New York City, working at Deloitte Consulting, traveling every other week. So I was basically never in the city. After my first year, I said, in my first year of living in New York City, I said, I cannot wait for the opportunity to come to me. I have to go out and create the opportunity. There was an ad, I can't remember how I found it. There was a culinary school that had an open house for a business program, and I signed up and attended. And I remember watching Tracy Wilson, who was the general manager, used to work with Danny Meyer at a bunch of restaurants, give this presentation. I said, this is a lady I want to meet. This is the organization I want to be a part of. And so after taking out a $16,000 credit card, I signed up for my business certification program. And I'd tell every single instructor about this challah bakery that I was planning to launch. And after that program finished, I received an invitation from Tracy, actually, from that person that I watched at the open house, to share how I could help her.
You were in New York, you were working with this company, and you started doing systems for this company. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So when I was in college, one of the courses that I took it's called Web-Based Decision Support Systems, which is a fancy word for coding databases. I had built a system that allowed a nightclub in New York called One Oak to more effectively keep track of their purchases, of who was coming through the club, because all that information lived in the heads of the promoters. The business didn't really have that centralized. They had note cards, they had messy Excel sheets. I think a lot of people still operate like that today. And that kind of idea of helping a restaurant centralize their relationships stayed with me. And so when I started working with this restaurant group, that was my pitch. I would help them basically keep track of all the information inside of the business. The person who hired me used to work at Disney. He told me, hey, you're going to be the perfect person for this, Deloitte consultant, systems engineer. And I showed up on day one and I said, cool, where's the software? He said, it's right there. I opened it up and it was empty. And I said, okay, what's the deal? How are we using it? He's like, I don't know, figure it out. And I started. And that started my quest of setting up this software, which wasn't simple, but it taught me how to be tenacious, how to be persistent, how to get the answers to the questions that I had. And that started for about 18 months, setting up this software, connecting, if you're thinking about pasta, A pasta has the pasta, it has the tomato sauce has garlic, it has pepper, it has spices, it has chicken stock, it has wine. The tomatoes came from a can, the wine came from a box of 6 bottles of wine, the tomatoes came in a case of 5 pounds, the garlic came in a bottle, really breaking down all this information from raw ingredients to finished product would be the foundation of how I think about for business owners. How do you take your raw ingredients of like, I know how to create videos, I know how to, design a photo shoot, and, the finished dish is Reels. How do you think through that transformation process? And not just the process of it, but how do you now design the experience so that the person that is going through it, the diner or the guest at your restaurant, is like, wow, that was amazing. That wasn't just a Pizza Hut pizza. That was, a glorious, that was Mr. O1. That was something that like keeps you wanting to come back for more. And so that was how I kind of started to think about hospitality inside of your, the offer that people design for themselves.
Was there any mentor that you worked with at the time, or was it all self-taught during that time?
Jens, who was my boss, I guess he served as a critical mentor. He helped me. He didn't teach me anything. I don't know if mentors teach you things. They kind of help create the conditions that you will find the answer. And so Jens continuously would remind me to stay focused on what it is that I was brought in to do, which was set up this software, and not to think about all of the things that were outside of my control. Like, why was the chef crazy? How come, no one can communicate to me in the right way? Or how come the baker was losing her mind because she was asked by the owner to do all these things? Like, all that is out of my control. What was in my control is my ability to set up what I was hired to set up for. And that would stay with me for many years later when Jens would hire me into another role to help sell a nearly 100-year-old family-owned restaurant group to the next generation owner.
That fed right into the 100-year-old restaurant, right? Tell me a little bit more about that. So you got out of that, you learned the systems, you got it down pat, and then you pivoted it into another industry. Well, the same industry, but different opportunity, right?
Well, there are a couple of steps before that, but I was with this restaurant group. I got really good at setting up the software, got really good at engaging with different employees so that I could get the information that I needed. I was kind of internally. Before the restaurant, the 100-year-old group, I would have another year-long stint in a tech startup that was serving the hospitality industry, catering with point-of-sale solutions. And it was, again, a lot of me internally collecting data, setting up CRM softwares so that our CEO could communicate to the relevant investors and the relevant customers. And then I had this inspiration that no one taught me how to do this. The food industry was moving to technology, and there were going to be hundreds of people after me that were going to go through this pain of learning on their own. So I said, if I could do something about it to help them, to encourage them to keep moving, to, recognize their unique abilities, why not? And so I started writing this book that would eventually become Newbie. This is my first book. And it took 2.5 years to actually write and get out. And at the very beginning of this book, I told Jens, this mentor of mine, about it. And he's like, no, just wait. I have another opportunity for you. And it would be with the Palm Restaurant Group, which was a 95-year-old restaurant group started by 2 Italian immigrants in the 1920s. And it would become the place where everyone, celebrities, business people, politicians, people would come and make deals at the Palm. There were all these caricatures on the wall. Servers literally were working there for 20, 30, 40-year tenures. I mean, you had 3 generations of servers in some of the restaurants. The grandpa, the father, and the son all were, and it was just such a homey place that understood warmth, understood the hospitality. And that was an experience where, hired to come in, modernize everything, implement a bunch of technology, but how do you preserve the warmth? How do you preserve the authenticity? And so it almost needs to be an invisible implementation. How do you implement all this tech without it even impacting the guest experience? It wasn't easy, but you know, we did what we could with what we had. It's so hard to kind of whittle a 10-year arc into a few sentences, but I think, you know, what I learned is that you have to be genuine, you have to be nice, you have to be caring, compassionate. A lot of people are putting in a lot of hours, and just remember that, because when you're speaking to a chef or a baker or a server who is hustling hard but with a huge smile on their face, it's just remember, you know, be compassionate. It's the same with the service provider, like non-hospitality service providers. We are all putting in the work, and we're all people. We're all people. We can have that compassion. We can have that grace with, and the assumption that we're all putting our highest and best intention. So in our next video, I think what we're going to talk a bit about geeking out a bit on the technology side and CRMs. Again, you know, how do I think about how the business owner, how the viewer, how you can really level up your relationships with the CRM.